Welcome to the first ever podcast of the ADHD Medic. I am your host, Natasha Kita, and since this is the first episode, I will do a little introduction of myself before we actually get into the case. So, I am an EMT. I've worked in ambulances, I've worked in prisons, I've worked in a lot of interesting places because I worked on an ambulance, like I stated before, and I also worked as a traveling medic for very difficult. I want to say sites, but that might not really give you an idea of what I did. But the gist of it is pretty much that I've worked in a lot of different areas, like prisons that are kind of harder places to work in for a lot of people. So I've had some interesting experiences, some interesting conversations, and lots of conversations with some very interesting people. So I've always loved the true crime world. So therefore, we now have this podcast. So that's where the medic part of this podcast comes from. And the ADHD part of this is the fact that I have severe ADHD, as you might come to learn throughout my podcast, as I try and stay on topic with stuff, but we'll see how well that goes. So me and all of my co-hosts that I do have on this show have ADHD. So therefore we came up with the ADHD medic. And I love it. It makes me happy. So yeah, there is our introduction, and I guess we will kind of get more into the episode. I'm super excited to start this off with you guys, right? Welcome to the very first episode of the ADHD Medic. And today, don't laugh at me. And today, my co-host G will be joining me. I am your host, Natasha Kita, and today we are going to be talking about the possible murder, possible suicide case of Rebecca Zahau. So would you like to say hello, G?
Hello.
Yes. All right, so let's get right into it. Okay, so July 13th, 2011, a 911 call dropped. When the 911 dispatcher picked up, the call went something like this. Man replied, "Hey, I got a girl who hung herself." Voice was very calm, very steady. The dispatcher responded, "Is she alive?" After some wrestling and a long period of quietness, the man could be heard yelling, "Are you alive?" And then when he was asked what he was doing, he replied with he was giving her chest compressions. Before we get into the actual murder and possible suicide, we're going to go over who Rebecca Zahau was and a few other characters that take place in this horrible accident and horrible, mysterious thing that happened. This is one of the bigger cases in the true crime world. And the first time I think I told you this, and I learned about this case, I was so upset about this case. I was so upset. So this was the first case that I wanted to do on my podcast because I was very passionate about this case. So we're going to meet some of the characters first. So we have a very set stage for everything that happened during this case. Rebecca Zahau was born in Myanmar, which is in between India and Thailand. When she was born there, she was one of six children. She wasn't the oldest, she wasn't the youngest, she was somewhere in the middle. I don't know where all the children were, so I don't know where in the one of six she was. I just know she wasn't the oldest and she wasn't the youngest. Her family had to move out of Myanmar because her father was in the old government, so they were actually refugees out of there. So they had a very difficult life after they moved. Food was super, super scarce. They definitely had to fight a lot to keep their family alive and in a good area. One of the things that they did to kind of help themselves was they were part of a church. And I don't know what exactly the church did for them, But it helped them, I believe it helped them out with money issues and just getting them decent food to feed their whole family, because 6 kids that's a big family.
It really is.
That's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
That'd be hard to feed. They would have to be very creative with how they got their food. One of the things that was brought up in another podcast was that they had to lay out several breadcrumbs on a table, and they'd leave all of the doors and windows in the house open. So they wouldn't eat the breadcrumbs. They would wait for a bird or something to come and eat those breadcrumbs. And as soon as that bird or animal came in to eat the breadcrumbs, the whole family would jump on that one animal to attack the animal and try and get food that way, because that was more food than the breadcrumbs. So they used the little bit of food that they had to kind of scavenge for more food, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much like modern day hunting. Honestly, I might just have to take those into considerations if I'm ever in a scenario like that. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, for real. It's really smart.
Everything about the church wasn't really great, though. So there was a person in the church, one of the higher ups, that would have 3 of the sisters over for kind of these sleepovers, but they were like biblical sleepovers is what they were kind of referred to. Nothing biblical was happening at these sleepovers, though. The girls were getting sexually assaulted at these sleepovers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't good, but the family wasn't really able to do much about it, and part of that may have been because the church was helping it out. I'm not sure why, but if that was your one life source, it would probably be a really hard decision to let that go. One of the older sisters decided that she was going to go by herself, and the 2 younger sisters could kind of stay at home. During this, all the sisters kind of got really close because this is a traumatic thing that they all went through. So they were all kind of able to bond over this, even though it wasn't a great thing that they went through. It was a horrible thing that they went through. But they did come out of it with a very strong bond, and you see that later of how close these sisters are to each other. So when Rebecca turned 16, she moved to Germany to finish college. She started college first in Germany and then finished college up in Australia. And that's where she met her first husband, Neil. And we're going to hear a lot about Neil through this through this story. He's quite the interesting person here that we're going to learn about. Rebecca and Neil get married, and they move to New York in 2002. Rebecca gets a great job there working as an ophthalmic technician. I believe I'm saying that correctly, which is pretty much assisting the eye doctor, surgeon. Eye surgeon doctor.
Nice.
Thank you. All right. Even though Neil was working, the more and more Rebecca worked and the more and more he kind of got Rebecca's money, he started leaning heavily on Rebecca and her paycheck. Even though he was working, he was kind of taking her money, and eventually he quit his own job and was just using her money.
What?
Right? Yeah. He was like, you know what, babe? You got this. I'm just going to watch TV now. I hope you have fun at your eye doctor job.
You can take care of everything while I do absolutely nothing.
Exactly. So, not toxic at all. If he didn't already sound toxic to you, we're going to add some more in there just to make sure you realize.
Oh, great.
So, not only was he trying to pretty much take all of her paychecks, he also was super possessive of her. Yeah, it was... it was great. She was providing him all of her money, pretty much, all of her paychecks, and he wanted more. He was like, I want your time and your money, but you also still have to work. Rebecca and her family pretty much said that he would say a bunch of things and kind of wrote it off as jokes, but they were things that you shouldn't joke about, like, I'm gonna drive off a cliff with you in the car, pretty much.
What the?
Yeah, exactly. So, it wasn't good. Very toxic stuff of pretty much, you're gonna stay with me or you're gonna die, or at least that was what was reported. Don't sue me. Because of this, a lot of their relationship was an on and off again relationship. Like they would be dating and then they would break up and then they'd have a fight and then they'd be separate. But they always kind of got back together, even though probably wasn't someone she should get back together with.
It was one of those.
Exactly. After a while of being in New York, they packed up and they moved to California. When they moved to California, they had an off in their relationship and they were kind of taking a break. So during this off period of their relationship, Rebecca went on a date with a guy named Michael. Michael didn't know that Rebecca was married to Neil. There wasn't really a bad side on his part, but maybe a little bit on Rebecca's, so she did not tell him at all. When they were dating, she decided one day that she just didn't want to show up anymore. Pretty much, she didn't show up. She wasn't answering her phone, like nothing. So Michael's freaking out because he's like, oh my gosh, this is my girlfriend. She's not answering anything. Like, where is she? He calls her work. Her work reported that she hadn't been into work, and they were about to call him because they thought he was Neil. So they're like, oh, okay, well, we were just about to call you. Like, we don't know where she is. And he was like, oh my gosh, no one knows where my girlfriend is. This is not looking good. He starts freaking out a little bit, and he receives a phone call from Rebecca. Rebecca's pretty much telling him that she's been kidnapped on this phone call. But it doesn't sound like a kidnapping. The whole phone call is kind of calm. She explains that they didn't take away her cell phone, but they're pretty much driving around California with her in the back of the van. So he's freaking out. He's like, I need to go to the police. I need to tell them that my girlfriend was just kidnapped. This is not good. Like any normal boyfriend-girlfriend would go do, try and call the police if your significant other got kidnapped. That's not looking good. He goes to the police. He gives them all this stuff. He gets a phone call almost a day from Rebecca. He starts recording these phone calls and gives the recording to the police. And it doesn't seem like the police are doing very much. One time he goes into the police to give them another recording or more information. And one of the cops decides to kind of take pity on him and tells him, hey, we know where she is and she's fine. Like, she's not kidnapped. Even though he was told this, he didn't believe him. He was like, nope, I think you're wrong. I think my girlfriend has been kidnapped. She's telling me she's kidnapped, and he had no reason not to believe her. He decided to pretty much go hunt for her on his own. After several days of Rebecca being quote-unquote kidnapped, she comes back to him with, like, no explanation. She just shows up on the doorstep one day, and she's like, oh, hi, babe. What's up? Like, just nothing. Just chilling. And pretty much tells Michael that she wasn't kidnapped. She just went back to Neil. And so that's how we found out that she had pretty much been lying. She was married to Neil. So finds out all this stuff. So this is like a big look into her character and shows off a possibility of why this could be a suicide and also why this could be a murder. Rebecca tends to have a lot of impulsive behavior in relationships, and this was brought up in the court case as a big thing. Going for suicide and going against the murder side of this case is her impulsive behavior in relationships. And this shows a big part of it, of the fact that she left somebody and told them they were kidnapped. She was probably just at the mall. She decided to call Neil, say, hey, I'm kidnapped, and just didn't come back to him until a couple weeks later. And just shows up like nothing happened. So after all of this, they're together. Michael and Rebecca are still together for a little bit. And then she does it again. She just kind of leaves. She doesn't really break up with him, though, until a couple months later. She just kind of leaves without explanation. And then a couple months later, breaks up with him over the phone. Turns out, again, she just went back to Neil. She just wanted to go back to Neil. She didn't like this new guy anymore. She just wanted to go back to Neil. After this whole relationship, and when Neil finds out that she's been with Michael, he decides that they need to move because he doesn't want her flirting with any more people. But that happens again even though they move. So they move to Pennsylvania. The cheating still kind of continues. Well, I don't know if you would call it cheating because they take breaks in their relationship, so I guess it's whatever you want to call it. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no clue.
Leave it to your own discretion, I guess. After they move to Pennsylvania, cheating continues. he says, all right, we're packing up, we're moving again. They move to Colorado. So Rebecca gets a job in Colorado doing the same thing. This is where she meets her soon-to-be next lover, Jonah Shacknai. He met her during an appointment that he scheduled. So he pretty much showed up to her workplace, was like, hey, you're kind of cute. And they started talking. Jonah was very well off in just about everything. He owned a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical company, and ever since he was a kid, he was very academically inclined, very physically inclined. He was in all the sports as a kid, super smart. Catch of a guy, right? So we're going to learn a little bit about Jonah Shacknai and a little bit about him. I hope I'm saying that last name right. I might be butchering it.
Let's just hope you're saying it right.
Fingers crossed, right? Jonah moved to New York after he started this pharmaceutical company where he meets his first wife, Kimberly. After he met Kimberly, they moved to Arizona to pretty much pursue this company, make it bigger. They didn't just move themselves, they moved to their whole company. Just everybody, employees, everyone. I don't know how rich you have to be to move all of your company, but that takes some money. After they moved to Arizona, moved their company, they had 2 kids who ended up being one of our more main characters' half-siblings. So these 2 kids are important, but not super important. Everything about this relationship seemed really good from the outside, but they were actually having a ton of issues. They were doing well financially, not well romantically. They butted heads on a bunch of stuff. So they ended up divorcing, and there's allegations that Jonah met his second wife while he was still married to Kim, but most people just say that he met his second wife after he divorced Kim. So Jonah's second wife, her name was Dina, and she's very, very, very important to this story. Dina and him had 1 child together. His name was Max, and he's also going to be very important to the story, so remember these characters.
Will do.
Perfect. Dina is a child psychologist. Seems great for a kiddo. Child psychologist. Man with multi-million-dollar company. Sounds like a power couple right there. But
sounds like a whole lot of wealth.
Oh yeah, for sure. But this couple actually seemed worse off than Jonah and Kimberly. So Dina and Jonah would have physical fights. And these were all allegations. Lots of neighbors said lots of things, and family members said lots of things about Jonah would hit Dina, and Dina would kind of hit back. There's an allegation that Jonah even called his dog to bite Dina at one point.
What?
Yeah, so a lot of really crazy stuff. So this marriage did not end very well either. And right after he divorced Dina is when he met Rebecca. After Jonah and Dina get a divorce, Jonah decides to buy, get this, a $13 million home in Coronado. Right? $13 million on a house.
I have like $2.
So this house was such a landmark that it even has its own name. If you have a house that has its own name, that's a pretty cool house. The name of the mansion is called the Speckles Mansion. And the house layout, it's not just one house. There are separate buildings on this property. There's like the guest house and even a servants' corridor house. So several different houses on one plot of land.
Oh my god.
So the other part of this house is this isn't even the main house. This is the summer home.
The summer home.
The summer home. They're here like a couple weeks out of the year. That's it. And that's everyone in Coronado. Coronado is definitely rich person playground area. It's everyone's kind of second home, and they're just there for a couple weeks, and that's kind of it. Nothing else.
Nothing else?
No.
Oh my god.
The start of this relationship seemed to go really well. This seemed to be the best partner that Jonah had. They both had very similar minds in exercise, in intelligence, in food. They both were very smart. They both were very particular what they put into their bodies, put onto their bodies, all of that. They were very healthy-minded people. They both liked to work out. Just seemed like a very healthy relationship of, all right, let's go do a run on the beach or something like that. Seemed very positive relationship. What Jonah didn't know was that Rebecca was still legally married to Neil. Still, at this point. You see a little bit more into Rebecca's character about these relationships and the different types of things that she has. She also had a very weird relationship with food. She did really like to eat healthy, but she also hated to waste food. And a lot of this could have been from her childhood and how scarce food was for them. There was one point where Rebecca cried over pineapples. They had taken a trip to Hawaii and tried to bring back pineapples onto the mainland, which, if anyone has ever been to security at any airport, they don't like you bringing fruit from one area to another area, which is reasonable. There's a lot of stuff that can be brought over in fruit, but they're very particular about that. So TSA was pretty much like, no, we're not going to let you bring these pineapples in. And Rebecca started sobbing in the middle of the airport because she wanted to take these pineapples with them.
Dang. So why do you think she did that?
I think it was because her family grew up poor and food was really scarce. Like, they had to do the thing with the breadcrumbs where they were trying to catch birds. They were doing modern day hunting. So I think because of this, she had a very particular relationship with wasting food, and she didn't want to waste food.
Okay.
Not everything was fine and dandy, other than the fact that Jonah didn't know Rebecca was married to Neil. There was also a lot of family tension. So the two ex-wives, Kimberly and Dina, both kind of joined forces. They didn't really like each other when it was just the two of them, but they kind of joined forces to attack Rebecca pretty much.
Why?
Jealousy. I have no idea. If somebody got with your ex and like another person got with your ex, you would kind of like join up forces, maybe.
Like frenemies.
Yeah, like frenemies, exactly. They would kind of stalk her, like they'd go to her yoga classes and everything, and just kind of be a little rude toward her.
What?
Yeah.
They stalked her?
It was kind of like that girl versus girl stuff where I don't like this girl, you don't like this girl, let's go to your yoga class and just kind of stare at her. It's definitely like some Mean Girls kind of stuff. Not only were they just going to her yoga classes, Dina also decided she wanted to hire a private investigator to find any kind of dirt on Rebecca.
What?
So she actually found out that Rebecca was still married to Neil, and she pretty much tried to undermine Rebecca by bringing this up to Jonah. She was like, look what I found.
Oh.
Your girlfriend is married legally. And this plan backfired horribly. Jonah pretty much talked to Rebecca and was like, hey, are you still married to this guy? And she was like, yeah, but we're separated and I'm not seeing anymore. And that was kind of that. But this caused the tension between Dina and Rebecca to get so much worse.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah. And what didn't help was that Dina's son, Max, loved Rebecca. And Dina hated this. But she couldn't do much about Rebecca hanging out with Max because Jonah had half custody of Max. So she couldn't do much about it. She just decided to just be angry about it. Which, part of it does make sense, because if that was your kid and they're getting close to your ex's new girlfriend, you might be a little bit mad too. Of, that's my kid. You are pretty much like taking my place. I don't like that kind of thing.
Like a bit of jealousy.
Yeah, but with your kid instead of your partner kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, if anything, it might be a worse jealousy.
Yeah.
Because it's your child. A lot of this came into play during Max's school events. At one point, Rebecca showed up to one of Max's games, and Dina was not happy about this because Jonah didn't allow Dina to go to any of Kimberly's kids' things. So she, out of respect for Kimberly, she's pretty much like, this isn't fair. Like, you should have as much respect for me as you did your first wife. I wasn't allowed to go to her kids' stuff, so Rebecca shouldn't be allowed to go to Max's stuff. So she did win the battle in that of Rebecca was kind of banned from the school, of she wasn't allowed to go to any Max's events because of this family tension that they had. In 2010, Rebecca quit her job and worked kind of full-time at the house, just cleaning and taking care of all of Jonah's kids. At this point, all of the drama had kind of simmered down, and Dina pretty much decided, well, I can't really fight it, might as well just use Rebecca as like a nanny kind of thing, because she was already taking care of the kids, so sometimes she wouldn't even come and pick Max up. She would just kind of leave him there for Rebecca to take care of. And I don't know if Rebecca was mad or not about it, but I'm pretty sure she didn't mind too much because she did really like Max as a kid. She liked looking after him and in a way kind of saw him as her own kid almost. She really had that motherly love toward him. During this time, since Rebecca was at the house a lot more, she had the kids and everything, Jonah and Rebecca decided to get a dog. They did already have a dog, a little bit of a bigger dog, that's name was Ocean, and they wanted another dog, but more as a protector dog. Not that this dog couldn't be a protector. The dog did bark at strangers and stuff, but they wanted a specially trained dog. They had a dog purchased and trained professionally for $10,000 so that it would be brought up and raised as a puppy by a trainer, and then once it was fully trained, the dog would be dropped off to them. But as soon as the dog got off the plane, Rebecca stated that she wanted to cry because the dog was nothing like it had looked. So a neighbor had kind of come by when they were teaching Jonah how to use the dog and give it commands and everything. And she had made a comment that the dog was really cute. And this made Rebecca really upset because she didn't want a dog that was cute. She wanted a fierce-looking dog, a dog that would protect her. So they ended up getting rid of the dog and didn't keep it. So they sent back a $10,000 dog.
Dang, bro.
Actually, it was probably more expensive than $10,000 because that was just the price of the training.
Oh my god, but that's still so much money.
Yeah, a lot of money on a dog. But I guess they could afford it. They bought
Yeah.
a $13 million home. I'm sure they could spend $10,000 on
Probably
a
like
dog.
$2 for them.
It's like us buying a cheeseburger
Yeah, like that's literally
at McDonald's.
nothing.
Now that we have a background on both Rebecca and Jonah and kind of the start of their relationship and where that family dynamic look, we're going to jump all the way to July 11th, 2011. 11/11. Yes. All the 11s.
All the 11s.
All the 11s. All right. So the day was pretty much Jonah had gone out for the day to go work out. Rebecca, Max, and Rebecca's younger sister, who is given an alias since she is a minor. So we're going to be calling her Ariel, even though that isn't her actual name. That's where we're going to be calling her for the rest of the episode, just to protect her identity. The three of them were all going to go to the beach and then the zoo later that day. So everyone had gone to their respected rooms to get ready for the day. Ariel had decided after breakfast that she was going to shower before getting ready to go with everybody, which I personally found a little bit odd. If I was going to the beach, and I don't know about you, but if I was going to the beach, I would not shower. I would shower after the beach and the zoo. That particular thing was a little bit odd, but I don't know, some people are odd.
No, I definitely shower afterwards. I'd be feeling disgusting, you know?
Exactly, and the beach is salty, and usually, I don't know about you, again, my skin gets sticky after I go in the water of the ocean because of all the salt.
Yeah, I'd just be feeling gross.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just disgusted.
Exactly. I did find this part a little bit odd, but we'll move on for now. But Me personally, I would shower after all of the day's activity.
Everyone does things differently.
That's true. So maybe she just really wanted to shower. I don't know. Who knows? Ariel was in the shower, and when she had got out of the shower and kind of gotten dressed, she heard her sister yelling for her from downstairs. Ariel quickly runs downstairs. She's like, what's going on? When Ariel gets downstairs, she finds Max laying at the bottom of the staircase, unconscious, and Rebecca holding his head in her lap and yelling at her to call 911. The way that the staircase is constructed.
Cuss.
Stop. You know what I meant to say. Staircase is constructed is it's a 2-level staircase from the bottom floor to the top floor, and it kind of curves around in a way, but it does it at angles. So it's not like a spiral staircase. It kind of goes in angles upward. And in the middle of the staircase, but over the railing, is a chandelier. And the chandelier, when she had found Max, was on the floor laying everywhere, glass everywhere. The other thing that was near Max was also a scooter laying over his leg. So Max had been gifted this scooter by Dina, and Jonah hated this scooter because Max loved to ride it around, and at one point, Jonah caught him trying to ride his scooter down the flight of stairs, pretty much, which he got reprimanded for and was pretty much like, that's not safe, you can't do that. The reason that he decided he wanted to do this is because he saw his older teenage half-siblings sliding down the railing, and it's a pretty big flight of stairs, so I don't know about you, but I would do the same thing as a kid. Slide down the railing.
No, I would have been too scared.
No, you never did that as a kid?
I never did that.
I slid down railings all the time as a child. My mother never liked it. I got in so much trouble.
I imagine so.
Pretty much there's this horrific scene of Max is passed out, glasses everywhere. There's a scooter over him, so it seems like he had almost gone over the railing, hit the chandelier somehow. Maybe he had gone down on his scooter because the scooter was laying at the bottom of the stairs with him. And his head is in Rebecca's lap, and she's yelling at Ariel to call 911. So keep in mind that Ariel's first language is not English. So this 911 call after Ariel found the phone, which did take her a second to find the phone, was a mess. There was so much miscommunication in this 911 call that when PD and ambulance arrived, they thought the person that was unconscious was Rebecca, not Max. The whole call with the dispatcher was just very, very jumbled.
Doesn't that happen a lot? There's always like some miscommunication in calls. I mean, we would know.
Yes, that's true. There is always so much miscommunication in calls, and I've shown up. I'm an EMT, and G was also an EMT, and there were multiple times where we would show up to the call, and whatever we got from dispatch was completely wrong. Whether it was the gender of the person or even the reason why we were called was sometimes so wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that this 911 call was jumbled up, we also have to keep in mind that Ariel was a younger girl. She was about 13 years of age when she made this call, and English not being her first language.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not shocked that this call was jumbled.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah.
That'll happen.
And she was so at this point, she's talking to the dispatcher. Rebecca's yelling at her of like, what's happening, trying to answer the dispatcher's call, trying to help Ariel relay what's happening. And so the two women kind of talking to Ariel at one time, and the dog is barking. Keep in mind that Ocean only really barked at strangers. So this leads a lot of speculation later in the case. But also, dogs tend to know their owners and know people in their home. And if something happened to you, do you think your dog would go crazy? Because I know at least one of mine would.
Oh, my dog would definitely go crazy.
Yeah, if I fell down a staircase, my dog might bark. So, there's dogs barking, there's people yelling. It's a lot. I'm not surprised this 911 call is a mess. because a lot of 911 calls are a mess. It's actually pretty normal. Police arrived at about 10:12 that morning. And when they arrived, the first detective to walk in on the scene noticed that Rebecca wasn't doing CPR. He didn't see her do any CPR. He also noticed the way that Max was laying and the fact that the scooter was over his leg. Notice where the chandelier was. The chandelier looked like it had fallen directly under the place it had been laying, which is an interesting fact to keep in mind for later. So, scene is a little bit crazy. Paramedics show up, start working on Max and doing CPR and getting him in to the ambulance. During this time, Rebecca was able to call Jonah and she didn't tell him exactly what was happening, but was pretty much like, all right, you need to come back home. Something happened. And if anyone gets that call, it's usually because it's something urgent, even if she didn't say specifically what happened. So Jonah got home pretty quickly. As soon as he got home, he saw paramedics bringing Max out, and he was like, I need to get inside. They wouldn't let him inside. They said, an accident has happened. It's your son. Which to any parent is like the worst words you can hear. It's like, there's been an accident, and it's your kid. Everyone's a little panicked. Jonah gets into the ambulance with Max. They start driving to the hospital. Before they left to go to the hospital, Jonah told Rebecca he didn't want her to come because Dina was going to be there, and he didn't want Dina and Rebecca to fight. He's pretty much like, this is about Max. I'm not going to have this be the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Like, you're not going to fight.
Nice reference.
This can't be Mean Girls 3, okay? Like, no. That's no fighting. So he told her that she can't come, like she needs to stay. She went to the hospital anyway, but did respect his wishes of not going into the hospital. So Rebecca rode with a police officer. There was also a psychologist that was riding along with the police officer during this call. Rebecca and her younger sister Ariel went with this detective and the psychologist. Ooh. The psychologist to drive to the hospital, and they kind of just hung out in the parking lot. And the psychologist even made a remark that Rebecca didn't seem depressed or suicidal at this point. She seemed like the normal amount of distress that someone would be if a child in your care got hurt, and badly hurt at that. The psychologist, when she was talking to her and everything, did make a statement that she didn't think she was depressed or suicidal, which is another important thing to remember for later. After a while of waiting in this parking lot, Rebecca kind of felt a little anxious, so her and Ariel go in to the ER waiting room. So they weren't in the room, they were still respecting Jonah's wishes of like not being around them, where Dina and her would run into each other and have to brawl it out or whatever. But they were kind of sitting there, and they saw Jonah kind of pass back and forth multiple times. But Jonah never talked to either of them at all, which is understandable on some front, because you're a parent, you're panicked, your child just got hurt, like your focus is that kid. You're just tunnel vision in on that child. But also you have to remember that Rebecca is probably a little shaken up about this. If this was you or if this was me and we had a child in our care that got hurt, you would feel a little panicked. You would feel a little bad.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if this is your partner's ex-wife whose kid this is. You'd be a little panicked. You'd be a little distressed. So Rebecca made a few phone calls to family members, pretty much telling them what was happening, and even made a comment to her younger sister saying, Dina is going to kill me, which seems like a very normal thing to say, but it's something to think about when we find out a little bit more of this case. It's just like one of those pinpoint comments, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So Rebecca and Ariel, after Jonah didn't really talk to them very much, decided that they weren't going to get much more information, and they were just going to go home and kind of clean up the mess. They went back home, they start cleaning up all the bits of the chandelier, and Ariel ends up cutting herself. Rebecca's freaking out again because both kids got hurt, pretty much. So she does not feel great at this point. It's like, oh my gosh, there's 2 children. They're both hurt. They were both in my care. Like, what do I do? So she called her older sister to kind of ask her what to do. Her older sister had some medical experience, so she gave a call to her older sister. She's like, I'm going to send you a picture of the cut that Ariel has. Like, do I need to go to the hospital? I don't know if I want to go to the hospital because I don't want to run into Dina. Like, can I stay home? Is this something I can just wrap and go? Like, what do I do? So her sister had told her to take Ariel to an urgent care. It wasn't deep enough that she would have to go to the hospital, but she did need some stitches for it. So she took Ariel to the urgent care. She got it stitched up, went back home. At this point, Rebecca's trying to figure out if she wants to send Ariel home. This is a big deal. They're not sure what's going to happen with Max. So they're trying to figure this out. During all this time, she's driving to and from the airport to pick up family members and friends that are flying in. Rebecca is pretty much playing chauffeur at this point to be helpful since she can't really be there with Max. So one of the people that she goes to pick up is Nina, who is Dina's fraternal twin sister. And when she goes to pick her up, Nina stated that she was acting a little bit weird when she came to pick her up. She said when she picked her up at the airport, she gave her a huge hug and seemed overly excited that she was there, which seems like a normal thing, but Nina and Rebecca weren't very close at all. And also, this is Dina's sister, and Rebecca is very aware of how Dina kind of feels about her. So it just seemed like very odd behavior that she was overly excited that Nina was here and everything. So
you said this is Dina's sister?
Yes, this is Dina's fraternal twin. So it's Dina and Nina.
Okay.
I know it's a little confusing. But yes, they are sisters and they are twins. It was one of those twin names where they sound very, very
Friends
similar.
Are like, you know what?
You know what?
Dina and Nina.
We're gonna make it so that you guys always get mixed up in elementary school. Have fun. That was pretty much
and
what that was.
Funny.
Not for the teachers, but for us at parent-teacher conferences. She picks her up. She drives her back home. She's doing this with a couple other family members. But when Rebecca and Nina were in the car, Nina allegedly asked her more about Max's accident, kind of what happened. Nina stated that Rebecca told her that she didn't really know. She said that she was in the bedroom and that she had heard Max fall, which seemed a little bit different than a story that she had told Dina. So during all of this, it seems like a lot of Rebecca's story is changing, or at least that is what is alleged by other people. So there seems to be some differences in what's being told. So back at the hospital, doctors are trying desperately to save Max, but when they were doing their first assessment of him, they found that his heart had stopped for 30 minutes. It's a big deal if you don't start CPR immediately when you find somebody down and they don't have a pulse, because your biggest chance of survival after your heart has stopped, you've had a heart attack, whatever it is, it's super, super important for you to start CPR immediately. Your chances of survival go down rapidly if CPR isn't started within the first few minutes of your heart being stopped. Whether or not Rebecca had started CPR when she found Max unconscious on the floor is a huge deal of whether or not she did it, because if she did do it, she saved Max's life, potentially. She got on it and she got blood flowing, she got oxygen going back through that system, and your body needs your blood flowing, it needs your oxygen. Those are huge, huge components of why you're alive.
I would assume so.
Yeah, just a tad bit important. So the reason I bring this up is because it is an alleged statement that Rebecca made that she did start giving CPR to Max as soon as she found him down. But when Ariel came downstairs to the scene, Max's head was in Rebecca's lap. And when the officer came into the scene, he didn't see Rebecca doing CPR either. So it is another controversial part of this case of whether or not Rebecca did actually start CPR, which she allegedly told Dina, Jonah, and the paramedics that she did start CPR when she found Max down. When doctors were working on Max, Rebecca kept calling Jonah and trying to get updates on Max and what was happening. And Jonah was always kind of vague with his statements, and he said he didn't really give her much comfort. He stated later that he kind of regretted doing this and he wished he had given her more comfort and more information, because it seems like she really needed that information to hear something good about Max, or at least updates on what was kind of happening. He was just very vague about the whole thing. It's now July 12th, and Rebecca's making another trip out to the airport to pick up Jonah's brother. Jonah's brother's name is Adam, and this is another big key player in the scenes to come. The scenes to come. Adam is a lot different than his brother. If he's not quite as social, he's still very intelligent, but he takes his intelligence in kind of a different way. He's definitely the more relaxed sibling. He kind of just likes to be out on his boat, just kind of chills there. He has a girlfriend, but he never married his girlfriend. He's been with his girlfriend a long time. A very different lifestyle than Jonah. So two very different people, which I feel like is very common for siblings. Very different. And he also tends to be a little socially awkward. We can kind of tell this by some of the responses that he gives. Rebecca, Jonah, Adam, and another mutual friend of theirs all go out to dinner that night to kind of welcome Adam in and just to kind of do something to take their mind off of all the traumatic things that have happened. They go to dinner, and dinner is super awkward. Just nobody's talking about anything. Adam and the friend just kind of have nothing to bring up, and Jonah and Rebecca are both super distraught from everything that's happened to Max. So nothing's really happening at this dinner. There's very little conversation, and Rebecca doesn't even eat that much. She said she's going to eat later. She doesn't really feel like eating. A lot of people kind of glance over this, but I feel like this is something to look at because of Rebecca's relationship with food. Obviously, when you go to a restaurant, you can take stuff to go, but with Rebecca's really odd way about food, I feel like this is a very strange thing for her to do, to not eat something. So that either shows how kind of distraught she is, just how much she's kind of going through for her to not eat something because of that relationship with food. So I just see a lot of people glance over that, and I think that's a more important thing than a lot of people make it out to be.
Yeah, it's definitely like a big consideration, that's for sure.
Yeah, pretty much. It definitely it doesn't coincide with her personality. This is not something she would normally do, with how much she takes into consideration about food. So after dinner, Rebecca drives Jonah and Adam back to Jonah's hotel. He's staying at a hotel that's closer to the hospital because he wants to be near his son, which makes sense. And the mansion is about 20 minutes away, so he wanted to be somewhere where he could be there and be there quickly. So Rebecca drives Jonah back and pretty much tells Adam, like, give us a minute, I want to go talk to Jonah for a little bit. Her and Jonah go up to her hotel room, and she pretty much just cries the whole time. She is super distraught. She feels horrible probably about what's happened, and she's probably just scared for what's going to happen to Max and his condition. And in the moment, Jonah stated that he thought she was being a little bit needy, but later stated that he wished he would have been more considerate of her feelings and would have kind of been there for her, because it's obvious she's going through a lot too. She's not eating her food. She's crying for about 5 minutes, which is a totally natural and normal response to have, especially to a situation like this. After this, they converse a little bit more, and Rebecca leaves to take her and Adam back to the mansion. Her and Adam get back to the mansion. They both go their separate ways. So Rebecca is staying in the guest house that's in the mansion, and Adam is staying in one of the houses that's separate. So it's not the mansion guest house, but it's the separate guest house. So they're staying in two different, not parts of the house, two different houses, pretty much.
Two different buildings.
Yeah, two different buildings. And pretty much call it a night. Okay, so now we're getting into more of right before the murder. So 12:50 to about 1 a.m., Rebecca's phone receives a voicemail. And the interesting and kind of creepy part about this is that the voicemail was seen and then deleted. So nobody knows what was on this voicemail. We do know it was from Jonah. It was about 62 seconds in length. And somebody, whether it was Rebecca or another person, did listen to the voicemail and then deleted it. So there's no record of what was on this voicemail other than allegations.
That's suspicious.
Yeah.
That's just a tad bit.
It's a little creepy. It's a little eerie.
Yeah.
Feeling. So Jonah reported that what he sent on this voicemail was pretty much what the doctor had told him about Max's prognosis, which was best case scenario, he never walks or talks again, and worst case scenario, he dies. So a heavy prognosis. And Jonah pretty much said during the whole time he was just crying, he was sobbing. And later he says he wishes he left a very different voicemail, because a lot of people wonder if this is what may have pushed Rebecca over the edge, if this was a suicide, because this is a heavy voicemail that she could have possibly listened to of pretty much he's never going to be the same again. No matter if it's best case scenario or worst case, it's not good. So now we're going to jump toward 6:45 a.m. on July 13th, 2011. So Adam had woken up at about 3 a.m. because he couldn't sleep. I don't know. He has insomnia or something. Who knows? So he couldn't sleep, goes to the bathroom, lays in bed for a little while, ends up knocking back out. He woke back up at about 6 a.m., and this is what he reported to the police of what he did. And the specifics of this are a little odd, and you're going to see why. So Adam told police that at 6 a.m. he woke up, pulled up some porn on his computer, watched it, pleasured himself, and took a shower. The odd part about this was the specifics he gave about what type of porn he was watching. Allegedly, he stated to the police that it was specifically Asian porn that he was watching, which is a little bit of an odd thing because Rebecca is Asian.
Yeah.
So it's just an odd thing to throw in there. I don't know about you, but that's a little personal.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a little.
I don't know if lots of people would put that kind of information in there.
Yeah, like that's just, why would you tell the police that?
Right. Like, there's a difference between like an alibi and like over giving your alibi, maybe.
Like, if you're saying you're watching porn, why would you say what type of porn? That's just strange. It's weird.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd behavior. And apparently odd behavior and like saying things that weren't necessarily socially acceptable or like
exactly
that was
yeah,
was kind of like a normal thing that Adam did according to his girlfriend.
Oh.
So I don't know. Maybe that was normal for him. Maybe he was trying to help out the case best he could. there's plenty of people that just give an over amount of information just to to help any way they can to like help solve a case. It's just they give everything. They're like, at 3:05 I swept the kitchen floor. Like, some people just give an overly amount of information. So after Adam showered, he decided he wanted to go get breakfast in town. So he went over to the main house, decided to go over to the main house to see if Rebecca wanted to come have breakfast with him. So when you're walking from the guest house to the main house where Rebecca was staying, you walked through this little courtyard area. So as he was walking through this courtyard area, he was looking around, enjoying the birds and the pretty sunshine that was probably out at 6:45 in the morning.
Right.
I don't know. Birds are pretty at that time, right? That's like when birds sing. I don't know. So they were walking around, and in the distance, he sees something that looks a little bit odd. Something that is not normally supposed to be hanging off of a balcony. The thing hanging off the balcony was Rebecca.
Oh.
Rebecca's hands and feet were tied together with red rope. The same colored rope was tied around her neck in a noose and was hanging over the balcony. Rebecca was also stripped naked and gagged with a t-shirt.
What?
Yeah. So immediately, Adam goes to call 911. And this 911 call, I've listened to this 911 call a lot. So many times. Because I don't know, this 911 call seems off and a little weird, but not in the way you would think. So during this 911 call, he's asked, "What's your emergency?" And he responds, "There's a girl, she hung herself." At no point in this 911 call did Adam refer to Rebecca as Rebecca.
What?
She was only referred to as the girl or that girl.
That's really weird.
It's a little odd. So again, this might be part of his kind of awkwardness, where he doesn't really know how to respond to the situation, and people in stressful situations usually respond oddly, but usually not in this way. The whole time during the 911 call, he only refers to her as she hung herself, she committed suicide, she hurt herself. Anything like that. It was never, she's dead. Like, it was always about the suicide, which, again, it might be nothing, but it just seems kind of like a strange thing,
Like, he's immediately insinuating it?
Yeah, that she committed suicide.
Okay.
And I don't know about you, but we both listen to a lot of true crime.
This is facts.
Yeah, we like the true crime world. But even somebody that wouldn't listen to true crime, if you saw somebody tied up, gagged, and naked hanging out a balcony, my first thought would not be suicide.
Yeah.
I would honestly look around to see if I was in danger first, because that seems a little sketchy.
Just a tad bit,
My first thought is not going to be, oh, she tied herself up and threw herself out the window.
Yeah.
Just because that's an odd way to commit suicide.
It is, and like, if you're tied up, maybe you're gonna tie the noose around you, or maybe tie it before. I don't know. That's just so. It's just so.
It's a weird way. It's not normal.
It seems just like it's a lot.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it would be somebody's first choice.
Yeah.
To commit suicide that way.
Yeah.
When he calls 911, he refers to her as that. Through the whole call, he seems very calm. And there's this whole chunk of the call, almost about a minute, where he is saying he's cutting her down. So it seems like he set the phone on the ground or something and went to go get her down, because obviously you can't hold a phone while you're cutting somebody down.
Yeah.
So during this time, you can't really hear much. You kind of hear him talking or saying something, but it just sounds like a lot of static. A lot of people say, though, in parts of it sounds like there's a third person in the audio.
What?
So I'm going to get more into this in a second, but we're going to finish up kind of how this scene went and how this 911 call went first.
Okay.
But just keep that in mind. A lot of people speculate that and have kind of seen that. He cuts her down, puts her in the grass. So the dispatcher pretty much asks, like, hey, are you there? And he says, yeah, I'm here. She says, okay, like, is she alive? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure she's dead. So he states that he had started doing compressions, and the 911 dispatcher calls over to the fire department and puts him on the line with the fire department, probably so that he can be instructed on how to do compressions and everything. I've done compressions on people a couple of times, and when you do compressions, you don't talk with the steady voice, because compressing somebody's chest is a difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of effort.
Oh, yeah.
So usually it sounds a little like jolted, of like 1, 2,
Very
3.
breathy for
Yeah,
sure.
very breathy, because you're doing a lot of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of effort and so many muscles to compress on somebody's chest. But when he's kind of counting and talking, telling the 911 dispatchers that he's doing compressions, his voice sounds very steady the whole time. I don't know, maybe he's really good at doing compressions and keeping his voice steady. Who knows? But it just seemed like another odd thing to me of whenever I do compressions and whenever I've seen other people do compressions and communicate with me or I communicate with them, it's a very breathy sentence.
Yeah.
It's not steady communication. You're catching your breath in between sentences. It sounds a little choppy almost. So that was another kind of odd thing about this 911 call. So after he makes this 911 call, police show up, take over the scene. When police arrive, I had you look at a picture of Rebecca Zhao kind of down on the ground.
Yeah.
In this picture, she's laying on her back, but her knees are bent inward toward her and laying to the side. This is a very odd position for someone to do CPR on. It's difficult to do CPR on someone that might be tilted a little bit, or it doesn't seem like a good position for
Oh, yeah. 100%.
for somebody to do CPR. Yeah. It's another just kind of odd thing. He had removed the gag that was in her mouth so that he could give her mouth to mouth. So police weren't the people to break the news to Rebecca's family. It was actually Adam who called them to let them know. And according to them, the way that he responded to both the family and the cops was a bit odd. At one point, when he was calling Rebecca's sister, she was asking more about the kind of what had happened. And he responded with, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to push another person off the edge. Which is a very odd thing to say. So it was almost like he was trying to make a joke at like the worst time possible. Just not great.
Yeah, that's a very like weird words to say to someone, you know, after just like breaking the news to them. That's just weird. You don't say that.
Yeah. And during a lot of the police questioning, he seemed to almost make it about himself. At one point, he had said something along the lines of, I hope she didn't do this to try and send a message to me. Which, again, seems like a very odd thing to say.
Yeah, like, what do you think he's referencing? Because that just sounds very strange to me.
Yeah, the whole thing is strange, and the part that makes it stranger was Adam wasn't very close with the family. Like, he wasn't very close to Max. Jonah was his brother, but it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of communication between them. So it didn't seem like him and Rebecca were very close either. So it was just an odd thing to say because he didn't really know Rebecca that well and didn't know anyone else in that family super well because he didn't really keep in contact with them. Just another odd thing to kind of add to the pile here. So Adam did do a polygraph test. He did take it. It took about 3 hours to do. At the end of the polygraph test, though, the results were shown invalid. So we're not sure if he passed or failed the polygraph. No one really knows.
Huh.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, another
Huh.
kind of there's a lot of very interesting, odd things that happen in this case. A lot of weird things. Now we're going to kind of talk about what PD found at the scene. Room that Rebecca was staying in was on the second floor. So as you're walking up to the second floor and going down to the hallway where her room was, there was a couple droplets of blood outside of the door and a green and white towel that was kind of just thrown into the hallway. On the door, in black paint, was written, "She saved him. Can you save her?"
What?
So very ominous writing. And the family even stated that the writing does not seem like Rebecca. Rebecca was an artist and had an art studio in the house. It seems odd that, and even in the picture of this writing, the writing is very sloppy. It didn't seem like something an artist would do. Not saying that every artist has perfect handwriting, but they tend to have nicer handwriting because they're better with their hands. They are used to writing things. They're used to creating pictures. So usually they have some nicer handwriting. Again, not all the time. But the family did state that that did not look like Rebecca's handwriting on the door. And police pretty much ruled this as Rebecca's suicide note, which also seemed like another weird thing. First of all, why would Rebecca refer to herself in third person? And why would she write that? Why would you write that as your suicide note? If you were going to write a suicide note, it would probably be a little different. Like, "I'm sorry," or something like that. I don't know. It just seemed like a very odd thing to write as your last words kind of thing. When you enter the room, the bed was pulled away from the wall a little bit, and the rope that had been tied around Rebecca was tied to the bottom of the bed as kind of a stability point. The rope then led out to the balcony, wrapped around the balcony as kind of a second stability point, and then went over the edge. So there were a couple of prints on the scene, but police actually contaminated the scene a little bit and
What?
messed up some of the prints. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was one print that was taken into evidence, and it was an oddly shaped footprint, almost. And
Okay.
police wrote it off as it was kind of a V shape, but it doesn't really look like a V. But they wrote it off as it was a V-shaped footprint. So it was Rebecca hopping to the balcony and then jumping off because she had tied her legs together.
Okay.
So they wrote it off as it was her footprint, and the reason it was oddly shaped was because she was kind of jumping. So that was another odd finding that they found. And most of the detectives seem to have different stories on how they found the scene, even with just how the balcony doors were open and closed. One of them said the left door was open, and the other one said the right door was open. Another one said both doors are open. So there was a lot of differences in PD. No one could really come up with just one story. Everyone had different reports and different things to say about said scene. The whole scene wasn't secured and searched until almost 3 hours after PD showed up, which is understandable to a degree. It is a very large property, but I feel like 3 hours is a lot. Like, if there was someone else on that property hiding or trying to escape, they could have probably pretty easily gotten away, since the whole place wasn't searched and secured, for another couple hours. So another thing to just pinpoint in all your pinpoint comments that I've given you.
And this whole board of pinpoints.
Yeah, it's just gonna look like a murder board at this point.
Add another point. Pinpoint.
When Jonah found out about the news, he was pretty upset because he pretty much thought back to all the times that he didn't talk to Rebecca in the emergency room. He didn't comfort her the night that she was crying. Just all these times that he didn't really give her the comfort and take into consideration her feelings and her distress about Max's situation kind of came flooding back to him. And he felt distraught about, like, did she commit suicide because of this? Like, did this happen? Did I help kind of with this without knowing it because I didn't give her comfort, because I didn't do this? Like, did I have a part in this? He was feeling distraught about that. So with all of these into factor, there was a huge discrepancy of whether this was a murder or a suicide. Because if it was a suicide, this was a very oddly done suicide. So family had opinion, friends had opinion. It was just a huge disaster in the courtroom of, did she commit suicide? Did she commit murder? The family didn't think that she committed murder because they didn't think it would be something that she would do. She seemed very hopeful about Max's situation. It seemed like she thought that he was going to get better, that he was going to come out of this okay. The family stated that they did not think that she committed suicide. It just didn't seem like something she would do. She seemed like a hopeful person in this situation. And then the other side of this, was this a murder? So we're going to talk about some of the popular speculations with both the family, friends, and the public. One of the popular ones that Jonah was kind of thinking about is if the murder was done by Neil, Rebecca's ex-husband. He kind of wondered if this was done by Neil because Neil kept kind of trying to contact Rebecca. There was a lot of things that kind of disproved this theory, the note on the door being one of the main ones. Why would Neil write, "She saved him, can you save her?" If Neil wouldn't really have any reason to hurt Max. Like, he probably didn't even know about Max, so why would he write something like that on the door? That doesn't really seem to add up. Another one of the popular ones was if someone was out to hurt Jonah and take it out on Max, and when Max didn't end up dying, they decided to take it out on Rebecca. It's kind of to either hurt him because they weren't her employee for blackmail or money or something. But there was no blackmail that ever came through. So this is still a very popular opinion of maybe somebody did this in spite of Jonah to hurt him by messing with his family. Another super popular one is if this almost had some witchcraft involved in it.
Witchcraft?
Yeah, so
Okay.
Some people speculate that this was maybe a ritual sacrifice.
What?
Okay, so I'll explain a little bit.
Excuse me?
I'll explain. So there was a witchcraft-based book found in the house, but was never really put into evidence, and it was kind of pushed aside in a lot of cases and looking back on it. So that was one thing that kind of started this, and then the way that she was displayed naked and the way that she was tied seemed almost ritual-ish. Ritual-ish, yeah.
Ritualistic.
Ritualistic.
I have no clue the actual word. I could have just made you say a random
No,
word.
that was the word I was thinking of. So that may be the actual word. I don't
Let's
know.
hope so.
You know what? If not, we're just gonna make a new word. It's
You
a
know
word now.
what? In the dictionary.
I'm gonna write it in there. Write it in there.
Write it in there.
I'm gonna use pencil, so it can be erased later
There we go.
when we find out if it is a real word or not.
Some white out.
Yeah, you can just erase it. It's written in pencil. It's fine.
Oh, okay, for sure.
Okay. Anyway. And the fact that she was displayed naked is another kind of reason why some people speculate that this may be a ritual killing. And the fact that she was over the balcony could kind of symbolize they were trying to kill her in the way that Max would have fallen, which was over a railing. They sent her over a balcony.
Ooh. I don't know about that connection, but it's very...
It's a little far-fetched.
But it's intriguing.
It is.
You know, it's very
and
intriguing.
I feel like that's one of the reasons why a lot of people look into it, is because it is a very intriguing option. So I don't know if that is a legit option, but in my research I did find that was a thing that a lot of people brought up as a popular speculation.
You know, anything is possible, bro. Anything.
Yeah, that is true. And then one of the last popular speculations is that Rebecca or her sister accidentally had something to do with Max's accident, and pretty much out of guilt for what had happened, Rebecca had committed suicide. And then there's also the speculation that maybe the guilt of just being there when Max had an accident, and that she kind of got no comfort and no help with all the trauma that she was going through of having to witness that happen, having to perform CPR, could have caused her to commit suicide. So all of these are big speculations, and they're just the most popular ones of the family, the friends, and the public. And all of them kind of have things that go for them, and a lot of them have things that kind of disprove it. So these are just the super popular ones. Now we're going to talk about the autopsy, because that is something very factual that we do have about the case. So we're going to talk about that.
All right.
So I'm just going to kind of list off the findings, and we're going to talk about them and the weirdness behind so many of them.
Let's do it.
So the first thing that they found was there was sticky tape residue on Rebecca's feet. And this was weird because her legs were tied with rope. It almost seemed like she taped her legs, changed her mind, untaped her legs, which would be a very uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
Whether your legs are shaved or not, peeling duct tape off is not fun.
It hurts.
It hurts, yeah. And then tied her legs with rope. I don't know who would do that. That was the first finding. There was also black paint residue on her body, which a lot of people go, oh, okay, like that makes sense. There was black paint on the door, there's black paint on her body. The interesting part about this is where the black paint was found. It was not on her fingertips, it was not on her hands. The black paint was found on her back, her breasts, and her arms, but not her fingers.
Okay.
So very odd places to have black paint. Very odd places.
Yeah.
And specifically on her breasts, it was very weird, and she had black paint on one of her nipples. And the way that it was on her nipple was, it seemed oddly placed. It wasn't just like a splatter, like she flicked the paintbrush and it kind of just accidentally got on there. It seemed like somebody had black paint on their hands and kind of like touched it. Another very odd find. One of the other odd things was 4 points of possible blunt force trauma to her head. Police wrote this off as when she jumped off the balcony, she jumped head first and hit her head on the plants that are kind of below her. But they're just on her head. Nowhere else. And they're 4 separate points of blunt force trauma.
Wasn't she found hanging?
Yes,
Yeah.
she was. So they pretty much are saying, like, she was tied up, she had the noose around her neck, she, like, swan dived off the balcony, and, like, it snapped her back up, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So just remember that, of, like, that's how that, physics-wise, that's how it would happen, if she took a swan dive off the balcony. But her spinal cord and her spine cord and cervical were not snapped. If you took a swan dive off of anything, and the drop is 9 feet, by the way. If you took a swan dive off of anything, it would snap your neck. With hangings that are like that, where you jump off of something, it pulls that traction and your spinal cord tends to separate. So there would be some cervical damage. There should be some cervical damage.
Yeah, it sounds like there should be.
But there's none. So,
What?
another interesting thing.
Oh, very, very interesting indeed.
Yeah. So she also has large abrasions on her back.
Okay.
Large abrasions on her back, blunt force trauma to her head, no spinal separation or damage. It's all a little bit odd.
Yeah, that's just so weird.
So, blood was also found in her cervix and her vagina, but this blood was not tested.
What?
Yeah, so pretty much police wrote this off as menstrual blood. And that's how they came up with the reason for the blood outside of the door. Is there was a couple drops of blood by the door, and they said she was on her menstrual cycle. That when she like bent down to, well, actually she would have to been standing up because the writing was high. When she stood up to write her suicide note on the door, she bled because she was on her menstrual cycle and she was naked. So they never tested the blood, and you can find out whether blood is menstrual blood or not. But it was never
Didn't
tested.
do it?
No.
What?
No testing was done. So we don't know what type of blood it was.
That is also very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's
Piece
interesting.
of information.
So another thing was the lividity. So lividity is pretty much something that helps people tell how you died. So it's where all the blood and everything settles in your body after you die. So with somebody that is hanging, the blood usually settles in the lower extremities. When she died, and this isn't always 100% accurate, but for something like this, it's very drastic. When she died, her lividity was in her back. So it seemed like she was almost in a laying down position. That is usually where lividity is, if you're in a laying down position when you die. I am not a medical examiner or anything, or a doctor. I'm just an EMT. But lividity usually, that's a very big difference. From lower extremity to back, that's a very big difference of lividity.
Yeah.
They found that. And another thing that they found that was very strange, and this kind of goes into our natural habits as humans, was her hair was not untucked from the rope around her neck. So whenever you put on a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you don't even have to think about moving your hair out. It just kind of happens. It's like a natural muscle reaction. Maybe not you. You have short hair.
I was about to say, maybe not.
But you had long hair at one point.
I did, but no, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right,
and
yeah.
whenever I move my hair, I don't even think about doing it when I put on a t-shirt. I just move it.
Yeah, for sure.
It just comes out. So that's another thing of like you would have to fight that natural, you would have to think about not untucking your hair.
Yeah.
You would have to make that like as a decision because just naturally, that's just naturally what you do.
It's just like a regular instinct.
Yeah.
Just take your hair out.
It's a regular instinct for sure. So the other part that we kind of already went over was the fact that she was naked. When you die, it's a very vulnerable thing to be naked. And not very many suicides are done naked because that's a very vulnerable thing. Even a lot of people that end their lives in like a bathtub usually have clothes on because it's a very vulnerable thing to be dead and naked. Just to be naked in general can be vulnerable for a lot of people, but to be dead and naked can be a very vulnerable thing, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a very weird way to find her that way. And then kind of the last big thing that kind of state that this may not have been a suicide was the knots on her hands. So her hands were tied behind her back. And the top of the knot was at the top by her elbows, not by her palms. So to get this knot tied would be very hard to do. And the knots weren't just like, you know, the little bunny knot. It was a difficult looking knot. You would have to put in some effort to tie this knot on both her feet and her hands. But especially on her hands because it was behind her back and it was above her below her elbows but like by her elbows.
Okay.
So very odd type of knot. Now we're going to go to July 16th. So a couple days after everything has happened, the doctors rule Max brain dead. So they keep him alive for a little bit longer to donate some of his organs as his parents' wishes, and then pretty much rule him as deceased. So very hard day for the family, and lost a very sweet little boy. So now we're going to go into kind of the theories and the rulings of both Max's case and Rebecca's case. And get ready to just be so upset. You're going to ever just so mad.
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay. Sounds good. One of the theories is PD was doing their questioning for Rebecca's case, and a man came forward and told PD that he had seen a woman come to Spreckles' mansion that night. And he said the woman looked like either she was waiting for somebody or she like knew someone was home and was trying to get their attention. Like she looked like she was kind of looking in the mansion, but like what she was supposed to be there kind of thing. It's like, so it was odd behavior, but it wasn't anything like alarming. Like, oh my gosh, someone's breaking in. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of like, oh, okay. Well, hopefully somebody opens the door for her. And when he was asked who it was, he said it had kind of looked like Nina. Who, if you remember, Nina is Dina's fraternal twin. So when he was given a picture of both Nina and Dina, he picked out Dina. And Dina, and he said, that's her. That's the woman that I saw at the house. So Dina had said that she was at the hospital all night with Max. And there is CCTV footage of her going into the hospital, but that's kind of it. And the mansion is only 20 minutes away from the hospital. So it is theoretically possible that she could have left the hospital because there's only CCTV footage of her going into the hospital. So it's just an odd thing that he specifically picked out Dina from the picture and not Nina, who he had thought he had saw. And so fraternal twins means they don't look exactly alike. There's some differences about them. So enough difference that he was able to pick out which twin it was, pretty much. So with this theory as well, there is phone records that Nina was at Dina's house pretty much all night. And Dina lives like a block or two away from where Jonah's house is. So she was staying at Dina's house so that she could be kind of close to Rebecca, who could drive her to the hospital. But there was phone records that kind of corroborate her being at the house, but she wasn't on the phone all night. So there's only like a certain amount of time that you can account for with those phone records. One of the other theories is the twin swap theory. And this theory is pretty much that it wasn't Dina on the CCTV theory. I'm getting my words mixed up again. CCTV footage. They're saying that it was Nina on the footage and not Dina, and that Dina may have been at the house, allegedly. So that's another possible theory, that they kind of switched places because Dina didn't like Rebecca. That was obvious from the start that Dina did not like Rebecca. So a lot of people speculate that Dina may have had a part in the murder because she disliked Rebecca so much, and then also had further dislike with her when she was around when Max got hurt, and maybe partially responsible, or she put a partial responsibility on Rebecca because, like, why weren't you there kind of thing. So that's another theory, but a part of this that kind of disclaims this theory is that Dina also seems super hopeful about Max's condition. She was talking to the nurses about like where he's going to be at school the next year, whether he like how long it was going to be until he started sports again. So she didn't seem like she thought Max was going to die. That kind of disproves this theory of she didn't seem upset at Rebecca and like, you killed my son. It was more, he had this accident, but he's going to pull through. Like, that was her mindset.
Yeah.
And when Rebecca died, Dina kind of seemed more of answers died with Rebecca because they never really got a full story of what happened to Max. So in her mind, when Rebecca died, answers died with her. Of she didn't ever get a full story. She wanted those answers. So why would she kill her if she didn't have those answers? And then one of the more popular ones with both the family and the public is that Adam had something to do with killing Rebecca. Whether that was Adam was hired by Dina or by Jonah for whatever reason to avenge Max or whatever it is, the very popular theory is that Adam had something to do with the murder of Rebecca. And some things that kind of disprove this is that Adam didn't really know the family that well, and he was doing well off. Like, he didn't need money. He wasn't poor. He was doing pretty well. So what would the motive for that be? If, like, he wasn't super close to Max, so it doesn't seem like he would avenge Max, like, you killed my nephew, I'm gonna kill you kind of thing. And it doesn't seem like he would do it for money because he wasn't struggling. He was doing pretty well. He made good money on the docks. So a lot of this didn't seem like he would hurt Rebecca in that way. When they got to trial, Max's death was ruled an accident. Rebecca's death was ruled a little bit differently. Rebecca's death was ruled a suicide. And there were a lot of things in the trial that made a lot of people upset and kind of displeased with how this case went. So like I said before, they wrote off the the note on the door as a suicide note. The bleeding on the floor was menstrual blood. There was also a knife with blood on the handle, and people said that, or during the trial, PD had said that she probably cut the rope with the knife, and that's why the knife was there. And the blood was tested. It was Rebecca's. There wasn't much to really prove that that wasn't used against her, because there wasn't blood on the hilt of the knife or on the blade of the knife. It was on the handle of the knife. So the placement of it was weird. There was a cut on Rebecca's hand, so most people contributed to that. And then again, the whole thing with she tied herself up, she gagged herself, and then she threw herself. That's how they kind of wrote it off with events that happened. She wrote the note, she stripped naked, she bled on the floor for her menstrual cycle. But the weird thing is that there's no other blood. It's just that blood. So I don't know about you, but my menstrual period doesn't really just stop.
Yeah, mine neither.
Yeah. So to make this theory work, her period would have had to stop all the way from the door to tying the rope to the bed, and then tying the rope to the railing, and then jumping off. No blood.
Just suddenly stopped.
It just decided to go away. It wanted a 5-minute break or something. I do not know.
Walked out the door.
Yeah. So I don't know who was running this case, but that's what they thought happened. Allegedly. This is what they thought. Don't sue me. Please don't.
Please don't sue me either.
Yeah, don't sue anybody. We beg. So, the murder theory is one that kind of the family attorney came up with, and it was kind of thrown out of court. They were like, no, this didn't happen. It's ruled as a suicide, and pretty much kind of pushed it away. So the murder theory was Rebecca was strangled in the garden by somebody, and then instead of taking her body all the way upstairs, they left her in the garden and then went upstairs, made everything to look like a suicide, like painting the note on the door and then tying the rope to the bed and everything, went back downstairs and then hoisted her up with the rope instead of throwing her body over the side, which would make sense of why her spinal cord wasn't severed or damaged, because that way she wouldn't have been thrown. She would have just kind of been strung up and then left her there to make it look like a suicide. So there was a bunch of lawsuits after this of the family suing Jonah, suing Adam, suing Dina and Nina. Whole huge big thing, and lots of them either just got a smaller amount of money than they asked for so that the family could kind of just be left alone, or was just thrown out of court completely. So there is a lot of different lawsuits, and the family still wants the case to be reopened. They still believe that this is a murder that happened. There's so many points that kind of point to a murder. But there is a lot of things brought up that it's suicide too. So I'm going to bring up just a couple of those points of my findings going through the case and listening to a few of the people brought forward during this case. And then you can kind of make your own decision of whether you think this is a murder or a suicide.
All right.
So the reason I think this has something to do with why Rebecca Zahau may have possibly committed suicide circles a lot around her impulsivity, especially in relationships. Well, it's mostly in relationships. So we can see from her relationships, especially with the situation happening with Michael and everything that happened there, and her ex-husband Neil, or her then husband, but separated husband Neil, where she left Michael and told him that she was kidnapped at just a random point in time, and then left him again to go be with Neil, pretty much. Just the impulsivity shown in her relationships is a big part of why I think that this borderline personality disorder is maybe something that Rebecca did have that was undiagnosed, or if it was diagnosed, wasn't treated properly, and may have led to her suicide later on, her possible suicide, her speculated suicide. Obviously, I have my own opinions, but just I want to keep it kind of neutral so that people can kind of choose whatever they want. So I'm gonna go with my lesser favorite option. And in defending kind of the suicide, we're just gonna do it. So one thing that I found that could possibly point to why Rebecca could possibly have committed suicide was actually borderline personality disorder, and I'll explain why in a second. So the DSM-5 states that borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and effects, and marked by impulsivity beginning in early adulthood and presents in varying contexts. Yeah.
Go at it. Go at it.
So the reason I think this has something to do with why Rebecca Zahau may have possibly committed suicide circles a lot around her impulsivity, especially in relationships. Well, it's mostly in relationships. So we can see from her relationships, especially with the situation happening with Michael and everything that happened there, and her ex-husband Neil, or her then husband, but separated husband Neil, where she left Michael and told him that she was kidnapped at just a random point in time, and then left him again to go be with Neil, pretty much. Just the impulsivity shown in her relationships is a big part of why I think that this borderline personality disorder is maybe something that Rebecca did have that was undiagnosed, or if it was diagnosed, wasn't treated properly, and may have led to her suicide later on, her possible suicide, her speculated suicide. So there's a lot of signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder, but some of the biggest ones that I found that she seemed to have was intense and frequent changes in relationship, and then going from intense love to intense hate very, very quickly. Then there's obviously signs and symptoms of paranoia. So whenever somebody with borderline personality disorder feels that someone is about to make a change in a relationship, or is maybe thinking of leaving them or abandoning them, they will do drastic things to kind of stop that abandonment from happening, or put a hold on it, just to stop everything so that they can either latch onto something else, or they can stop everything and go back to whatever they were kind of clutching onto before. There's obviously a lot of signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder that Rebecca didn't really seem to have, like drastic changes in interests and goals. She seemed to pretty much have the same goals, like she stayed at the same job. She wasn't changing her major every 2 seconds, and if you change your major every 2 seconds, that's okay. A lot of us do that. That doesn't mean you have borderline personality disorder. That is just one of the signs and symptoms. And then a strong feeling of emptiness and self-harm or suicidal ideation. She didn't seem to have any of those. She didn't even seem very suicidal, at least from what the psychologist that rode with her in the police car. She said that she didn't really see Rebecca exhibiting any symptoms of suicidal behavior. So another big reason of why this might lead into a possible thing that Rebecca had was actually based off a study done in 2001 by the American Journal of Psychiatry. So the study that they did investigated whether a higher frequency of reported childhood abuse and trauma victims would be found in depressed adults with high levels of impulsivity, aggression, and suicidal behavior. So again, Rebecca didn't really seem to have aggression or suicidal behavior, but did have the impulsivity trait. So they found that subjects who reported a high abuse history had a higher chance of attempting suicide and had a higher impulsivity and aggression rate. So as we can kind of remember back to the very beginning of the podcast, Rebecca did have a history of childhood sexual, mental, and physical abuse. Not necessarily in the way that we might think of. With the sexual abuse, it definitely just was blatantly sexual abuse. But with the mental and physical abuse, it may have been more of she had to flee from her home at a very young age and had to go through some really difficult hardships, like not having food, that affected her a lot. And we could even see that in her adult years of how she had different relations with food and stuff may have pointed toward her relationship with her mental health, pretty much. So how this kind of goes back into the borderline personality disorder is, in this case, they found a lot of the subjects that they used had borderline personality disorder, or just could be shown in a lot of impulsivity, stemming a lot from the abuse that they suffered as children. Another part of this that kind of backs up a little bit of this claim is somebody that actually did a testimony at Rebecca's house case. So Dr. Berman Allen testified at Rebecca's trial, and he is a nationally renowned suicide expert. I didn't even know suicide experts were a thing, but they are. So he talked a lot about Rebecca's childhood abuse, sexually, physically, and emotionally, that kind of pointed to her being a high suicide risk. He even brought up some journal entries in Rebecca's cell phone. Apparently, the journals allegedly stated that she was not really feeling good about her and Jonah's relationship. So I am not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist. I did do a lot of research for this. I'm not a doctor. I am just an EMT. But I do work a lot with mental disorders and patients that have mental disorders. So I feel like I have a little bit of expertise when it comes to stuff like this, of being able to kind of see. But obviously I cannot diagnose anything, so this is all just my own little thoughts that I'm putting out into the world. So with all of this happening, of possibly having an undiagnosed mental disorder that's gone untreated for the most part, abuse history, impulsive behavior, and Max's accident, and the fact that Jonah didn't really give her much attention after Max's accident or comfort, the doctor did bring up that all of these kind of collaborated into her being a very high risk for suicide, and made the fact that she could have possibly committed suicide a very, very high chance. And then going back to the borderline personality disorder, Rebecca had quit her job and was living with Jonah. Her pay and everything was coming from Jonah. So with, again, mentioning borderline personality disorder, a big fear of theirs that they have is abandonment. So all of her ties were kind of in Jonah. So if she felt like the relationship wasn't going great, there could have been a lot of fear in abandonment at this point, because she was possibly feeling like the relationship wasn't going well, and that could be a really big thing, a really big step toward possibly committing suicide. And then if something happened with Max where she felt like it was her responsibility, and leading more into that fear of abandonment of, oh my gosh, I just hurt someone that he cares deeply about, he's gonna leave me, and just letting that eat her up, that could be a possibility of why she may have committed suicide. Okay, so that was possibilities of why she may have committed suicide. And I've stated a lot of why this could possibly be a murder, of how the police kind of handled this case. A lot of people speculate that the police were even paid off to kind of ignore some of the things at the site of the murder. And even during trial, Petey brought in someone to recreate the murder scene, specifically the knots. And when they did it, they didn't do the correct knots. They used different knots to tie it. And they also used a different rope. So it wasn't necessarily the exact thing that had happened, but was still wrote off as something that somebody could do on their own, even though it wasn't the same stuff. So a lot of that rules into the fact that this may or may not be a murder. So there's a lot of speculation and discussion behind this case, and it's one of the reasons why it's very high on the list of I want to say unsolved mysteries, even though it's been ruled as a suicide.
It's technically solved.
Yeah.
Technically.
It's technically solved.
But other opinions might form.
Yeah. So a lot of people have opinions against the ruling, including Rebecca's family, who really want the case reopened. So I don't know.
Which is definitely, maybe they should.
Yeah. I think a lot of people advocate for this
Yeah.
case to be reopened.
I think it should be. Don't
Yeah.
sue me. Please don't sue me.
G allegedly states that she wants this case reopened.
I allegedly state. Now you'll never know. Maybe I don't want it open. Maybe I do. It's a legend.
It's a legend. So that is the case of Rebecca Zuhl. Zahul.
I can't pronounce her last name. Can you say it again?
Zahul.
Zahul. Okay. Zahul.
So let us know what you think about this case, because it's definitely a very interesting one and a highly controversial case. So let us know. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are. And thanks for listening to our very first episode of the ADHD Medic.
Goodbye.
We'll see you later. Well, thank you all again for listening to my very first episode of the podcast. And I just wanted to let you all know that a lot of my information came from Caitlin Rother's book on this case. It's called Death on Ocean Boulevard, and it is an amazing read. It reads, if you don't like reading, it reads so easy, and lots of good information. And even for those of you that like picture books, there's even a couple of pictures in here too. And I apologize, at the very end of my audio, I did say that the name was pronounced Rebecca Zahul, but it is Rebecca Zahal, like I said at the beginning of the audio. So I just wanted to clear that up, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Definitely go check out Caitlin Rother's book, because it is just amazing, and if you want to know more about this case, that's like the best place to go and find it. Yeah, have a good rest of the day, you guys.